Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Woolfolk. I'm the Director of Programming and Marketing at the Kansas City Public Library. I'm looking forward to the day that we can be back in the library, hosting authors in person and having conversations with all of you about our programs and the events of the day. But for now, welcome once again from the library of my home office as we continue these online installments in our signature event series. For those of you who are new to our online events, if you have questions tonight, you can ask them in the comments of the chat, and we will get to as many of those as we can following the presentation. Tonight's event is co-presented by our good friends at Rainy Day Books. Now more than ever, it is crucial that we patronize local businesses. So if you're interested in purchasing Night of the Assassins, give them a call at 913-384-3126. They can ship your book, or you can pull up to the store and they'll bring the order right out to your car. As an added bonus, the first several orders will include a signed book plate tonight. So that's one more reason for you to shop local and support a great local business. Our guest tonight is Howard Blum. Howard has presented twice previously at the Kansas City Public Library, first in 2009 for a discussion of American lightning, terror, mystery, the birth of Hollywood, and the crime of the century, and again in 2014 for a discussion of Dark Invasion 1915, Germany's secret war, and the hunt for the first terrorist cell in America. He joins us tonight to discuss his latest book, Night of the Assassins, the untold story of Hitler's plot to kill FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. Howard Blum began working as a reporter for the New York Times in 1986. There, he earned 2 Pulitzer Prize nominations for investigative reporting. Since 1994, he has been a contributing editor to Vanity Fair. He's the author of more than a dozen books, including the best-selling Gangland, Wanted, The Gold of Exodus, and The Brigade. He's one of our favorites, and we're delighted to have him join us once again. Please welcome Howard Blum.
Thank you. Last year, when I was writing Night of the Assassins, I say last year, but seems like a lot longer ago than that, part of a previous unimagined lifetime, but I won't digress. Last year, when I was writing Night of the Assassins, I spent a lot of time reading about World War II, and I would try to put myself in the shoes of the people I was reading about. I would wonder, could I find the will, the courage, the gumption, the perseverance to get through the challenges of life in wartime? I wondered, could I make the decisions that would put myself and my family out of harm's way? I mean, there I was, a writer sitting in my bucolic setting in Connecticut on the hilltop where I am tonight. If you hear noises in the background, they're probably the bullfrogs from my pond. They're pretty noisy now that spring is here. And I'd be sitting there and I'd be wishing, could I find the literary talent to imagine what it was like to live with this constant sense of uncertainty, with this constant anxiety, with a constant sense of one didn't know what was going to happen next, wishing I could bring that to the page. Well, now it's a previously unimagined year later, and I can tell you, be careful what you wish for. Now, I'm not saying that what the battle against the pandemic is a war like World War II. There's not another nation involved that's trying to defeat us. Another nation is not trying to steal our treasure, replace our values, our moral system with theirs. But we are involved as Americans in a fight for our lives and for our way of life. And crucial to this fight, just as it was in World War II, essential to how we manage to get from here to there to go through these struggles, is our leadership. We are counting on our leaders to get us to the other side, to get us through the troubles now, to make us believe that at the end of this road, there is going to be a safe America, a just America. And I believe that these days, more than ever in recent history, we can understand how important leadership is to our lives, our governors, our senators, our congressmen, and our president. The story I want to tell tonight is a largely unknown story about World War II, but it's about the three Allied leaders, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, suddenly being put in harm's way. It's a story of a secret plot that would have changed the course of history. It's a story about Hitler's dangerous realization that while the Germans were losing the war on the battlefield, there was a way for him to snatch a negotiated peace out of all his battlefield defeats. He came up with the idea for a secret covert operation. The secret operation to assassinate the three Allied leaders, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, in one concerted commando attack. The assassins, these were a group of specially trained SS men led by the man who the Allies called the most dangerous man in Europe. And the stakes, well, they were nothing more than the future of the world. And there was one man who had to lead the fight against him. This was Mike Reilly, FDR's Secret Service chief. He was 33 years old, a former college football star, and he was in over his head, but he had to find the courage and the gumption and the ingenuity to battle these assassins. But let me go back to the story beginnings. The story of the German plot really started evolving on January 24th, 1943, at the Casablanca Conference. That conference, Churchill and FDR met in North Africa. And on the final day of the conference, January 24th, FDR surprised Churchill when he told the reporters, "We are going to fight till the unconditional surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan." With those harsh words, unconditional surrender, the Nazi high command's hopes were ground into wistful sand. By the winter of 1943, the Nazis had realized that the war was lost on the battlefield. At least most of the generals did. They had been defeated at Stalingrad. The Allies had moved into North Africa, successfully invaded North Africa. American troop battalions were coming across the seas. Bombers were being produced by the American assembly plants. The war was, for all purposes, lost by Germany by the winter of 1943. But the German high command had a very pragmatic endgame strategy. They believed that they could snatch a negotiated peace from the jaws of defeat. They were hoping to get a stalemate. They were hoping that they could keep the war going so they could have this peace talks where Germany would be able to keep its conquered territories in the east, and the German nation would still remain a strong fascist state. But once FDR said we were going to fight to an unconditional surrender, the German high command realized those hopes were an impossibility. And even more so, they realized that now, one day, they would have to stand before an Allied war crime tribunal and answer for their crimes against humanity, for their crimes against civilian populations, for their extermination of Jews, Gypsies, and homosexuals. They would have to answer to these war crime tribunals, and most likely they realized they would pay with their lives. And there was something else. Most of the German leaders were students of history, and they knew that the last time in history there was the specter of an unconditional surrender was in ancient times when the Romans demanded an unconditional surrender from Carthage. And what happened to Carthage? It was completely destroyed. And they knew would be Germany's fate unless they could do something. So with those motivations driving them on, in July 1943, two men went for a secret meeting in the Eaton Hotel in Berlin on Budapest Street. They went to a private room off the bar. Now, at 6 o'clock at night, the bar room of the Eaton Hotel is usually filled with taxi dancers. These are young men, teenagers, and even younger boys who, for a few marks, will dance with the war widows or lonely war brides of the German army soldiers. Those are usually the only intrigues that take place at the Eaton Hotel bar. But that night, these two men went into the private room to discuss weightier matters. The two men were General Walter Schellenberg. General Schellenberg was the SS general in charge of Section 6. That was the SS's cloak and dagger foreign intrigue operations. And Schellenberg was a more bureaucrat than a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi. He was very young, 33 years old. And the man he was meeting with was old enough to be his father. This was Admiral William Parnassus. He was head of the Abwehr. That was Germany's traditional military intelligence. And they met in private to discuss the impossible, to see if they could begin to think about in a reasonable way how Germany might be able to assassinate the three Allied leaders, because they had heard talks, rumors about the Allies meeting for the first time together sometime within the year. So they began to discuss the problems. The first problem was this meeting, if it took place, would be top secret. Would Germany be able to know when and where it took place? That alone was an impossible challenge, since it would be one of the greatest secrets of the war. Then there was another challenge. The Allied leaders controlled an army of 22 million men. They'd be very well guarded. How are they going to be able to get to them? And yet, if they could find out where they were, if they could get through the first line of defenses, that raised the next problem. What kind of plan could they have? They couldn't have a frontal assault because they'd be mowed down by the Allied troops. And how could they sneak up on them? They didn't have enough time to formulate a plan. It seemed impossible. It was, as they discussed it, they seemed to realize this was an impossible mission, but they had no other choice. And then 2 months later, on September 12, 1943, something happened that made them and Hitler believe that maybe this impossible mission could succeed. What happened was that on September 12th, 12 gliders came down out of the sky on an Italian mountaintop, 7,000 feet high in the air. It was a rescue mission to bring back to Germany Benito Mussolini. The man in charge of this mission was Otto Skorzeny. Otto Skorzeny was a dyed-in-the-wool SS man. He had a dueling scar on his cheek. He was a ruthless fighter. He headed the SS's School of Special Operations in Orenburg, just outside the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. His goal, as he put it, was to make supermen. And Hitler had chosen him for this mission to rescue Mussolini. Mussolini had been jailed by the Italian king, Victor Emmanuel, and the special council. They stripped the strutting dictator of his powers and locked him in this fortress hotel 7,000 feet above sea level. So Skorzeny looked at the problem. The only way up was a cable car, it seemed. But that cable car, just a single cable car, it was guarded by a battalion of Italian troops. They couldn't send in paratroopers because at 7,000 feet, the winds were too strong in the Italian Alps. The paratroopers would be blown off course. There was no field that was clear to land planes. It was a very rocky area. So Skorzeny came up with this daring idea of sending in gliders. And the gliders swooped down out of the sky. 5 of them were destroyed before landing, but the others landed successfully. These commandos rushed out of their gliders, went to the hotel, and right away, the Italians gave up without a fight. 3 nights later, there was Skorzeny meeting with Hitler and Mussolini at Hitler's secret hideout in the East Prussian woods, the Wolfschatze, and he was crowned by the Allies even for this remarkable feat as the most dangerous man in Europe. And Hitler now appointed Skorzeny to head what was now called Operation Long Jump, the plan to assassinate the three Allied leaders in one coordinated commando operation. But as Korsenzi went about this, as he recruited men, brought them to his Orienburg school, as he collected weapons and bombs, it still was in his mind an impossible mission because he didn't know when the meeting was going to take place or where it would take place. Oddly enough, at the same time in the fall of 1943, while he was having these thoughts, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was having the same questions. And on November 2nd, 1943, he called Mike Reilly, the head of his Secret Service detail, into the Oval Office and told him he was sending him on a secret mission to get the answers to these questions of whether or not there would be a meeting of the Allies and where it would take place. Now, Mike Reilly is a fascinating man. He's sort of the hero of my book and of my tale, and he is a hero. He was a hero in real life. He described himself, he was an Irish cop with more brawn than brains. And when he took over the White House Secret Service detail, it was just 2 days after Pearl Harbor. He was 31 years old. As I said, a former college football player, not much law enforcement experience. And he had to protect a president in wartime. And this was a war like all others. It was the first war where the enemy's fighter planes, bombers could fly over Washington, D.C., where paratroopers could jump out of the sky on the White House grounds. And for the first time, the man he had to protect, FDR, was quite literally a sitting target. He was paralyzed. Mike Reilly knew that if it came to it, he would have to put his body in front of any assassin's bullet that was aimed at the boss. He called him the boss with a measure of affection and respect. The two of them were quite close, and they had a good working relationship. But FDR told him about his assignment. That morning, he tells Mike, I want you to go to Morocco, and you're going to meet an agent who's going to tell you whether or not the meeting is going to take place between the big three. When you find this out, I want you to reconnoiter the site and then join me. He was going to Cairo to meet with Churchill. So Mike Reilly heads off to Morocco. He's sitting at the Manana airport, actually standing underneath a palm tree. FDR liked a lot of intrigue. He was sort of a spy master. He liked playing that game. And the car of his secret agent pulls up. There's two soldiers in the front seat. They get out. The back door is left purposely open. Reilly goes to it. And there is the U.S. Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, who's just returned from Moscow. And he tells Mike, the meeting's on. Stalin has agreed to go to Tehran. And Mike's first thought, I have to go to Tehran as soon as possible. And his second thought was, where can I get an atlas? I don't know where Tehran is. Meanwhile, as he's finding out where this meeting is going to take place, the Germans are also finding out about it too. How do they find out about it? They had a spy, and this spy is an interesting man. He's what we call in the spy trade a walk-in. A walk-in is the most reviled figure in the intelligence community. Why is he so looked down upon? Because people are always suspicious of him. They don't know what his motives are. He's coming to bring you information, but is he doing this for the money, for patriotism, or is he just a loose cannon? Or worst of all, is he part of a disinformation program? Is the enemy sending him to you to spread deceits, to take you thinking in a wrong direction? What happened was that the valet of the British ambassador in Ankara, Turkey, came to the Germans and said he was able to get his hands on secret documents. but he wanted a fortune of money, 20,000 British pounds, which is at that time was about 100,000 American dollars, would be worth about $1 million today. In return for this fortune, each time he would bring secret documents. And Schellenberg had to give this a lot of thought. He had to wonder, can I trust this guy? Should I do this? And then he decided, okay, I'll take a chance. And then it became the question of paying him this fabulous sum. But he decided that wouldn't be too much of a problem because he had his Section 6 forgers make fake British bills. And he was paid off the spy in phony money, fake currency. But the spy brings in his documents, and Schellenberg looks at them and he says, quote, they're absolutely breathtaking. The documents were so important, they spoke so eloquently that the Germans now codenamed the spy Cicero after the great Roman orator. And Cicero delivered them the information about the Allied meeting in Tehran, about where it would take place in Tehran, in the country of Iran, and when, the last week in November. And when Schellenberg got this information, he thought, well, these are two key pieces of the puzzle that make this operation possible. But there was more good luck. It seemed that of all the cities the Allies could pick, they picked a city where since 1940, Germany had been sending agents into Iran. These agents had set up safe houses, communication facilities. They had made liaisons with the tribal dissidents. They had a whole network in place. But even more than that, over the past 3 months, Germany had been sending in commando missions into Iran, parachutists. They would come from a secret base in Crimea. And so they knew how to do these aerial insertion commando operations in Iran. And even more than that still, the man who was running these aerial insertions into Iran was Otto Skorzeny, the very man who Hitler had chosen to lead this attack on the Big Three. When Schellenberg put all these pieces together, he felt as if he couldn't believe his luck. He felt the operational gods had smiled on him. And he believed for the first time that this operation, this plot, Operation Long Jump, as the Nazis codenamed it, could succeed. Meanwhile, Mike heads off to Tehran to get the feel of the city. He lands at the airport outside town and is controlled by the Russians. And right away, he's feeling anxious. The Russians are our allies, but if he says the Russians are not our friends, and the sight of machine gun-toting Russians makes him very uncomfortable. And then he goes to the US Embassy where FDR will be staying. And he sees a high wall, and he said, well, this is good. I'll be able to surround troops around the wall. And then he drives from there to the British legation and the Russian legation across town. And it's 4 miles away. And he realizes that each day, FDR will have to go back and forth 4 miles through the twisting streets of Tehran, where every rooftop, every window could potentially hide an assassin. And his heart stops more or less. He can't believe the danger that FDR is facing. And then he finds out something else. As he walks around the streets of Tehran, he realizes there's an invisible enemy lurking in these streets. It's an invisible enemy, very much like we are living through in America today. But back then, it was typhoid that was raging through the city. Along the main thoroughfares, there were canal-like gutters where the water ran for drinking. But the Iranians also threw their refuge in there. It was a fetid mess. And the typhoid was rampant throughout the whole city. And here was FDR with his already imperiled immune system coming into Tehran. But before Mike could worry too much about this, he learned that there were only 3 buildings in the entire city where fresh water was brought in. And this was the American, British, and Russian embassy. American engineers, construction crews had built water tunnels from the mountain springs directly to these embassies, and they brought in fresh water. And he breathed a sigh of relief. Later, as you'll hear, he lived to regret that. But meanwhile, on November 27th, the Allied leaders start arriving in Tehran. Churchill arrives first, and his arrival is supposed to be secret. No one in the world is supposed to know that he's coming. But right away, there's an opening ceremony, and then the route into town is lined by Iranian cavalrymen high on their horses in comic opera uniforms. And Churchill is brooding and not feeling very comfortable about this whole thing. And then just as he approaches the British embassy, the car gets stuck in traffic for 20 minutes. And he says he's sitting there. At any moment, anyone could have taken a shot at him or thrown a bomb at him. He later writes, if it had been planned to put me in greater danger, it could not have been more perfectly done. With typical modern sarcasm, he makes that observation. Meanwhile, Mike, though, that afternoon at around 3 o'clock, brings FDR in quite successfully and quite quietly. FDR's C-54 lands. They get him to the American legation. Mike is setting him up on the second floor in FDR's suite that he's going to use. And just as he's finishing, he gets a message that waiting downstairs for him is General Dmitry Arcadia. That's the NKVD man, which is the precursor to the KGB, the Russian Secret Intelligence Service. And he'd like to speak with Mike. Mike figures, well, he's just there to tell me that Stalin has arrived and is safely at the Russian embassy. But as Mike approaches General Arcadia, he notices that the general looks grim. He has a hangdog look. And right away, he tells Mike, 38 German paratroopers entered Iran last night. And Mike's heart stops. But then Arcadia tells him, but we got them all. And Mike would later say, the only thing he can think of asking was, how do you know that we're just 38? And he says, well, the Russian general says, we questioned them quite thoroughly. And the way he said this, Mike would also later write, made his blood run cold. And he felt glad that he wasn't there for that interrogation. But at the same time, he was feeling good, at least the boss would be safe. But then, just as he was finding his equilibrium once again, the Russian general told him, but we also learned that there are 6 commandos still on the ground. They came in on a separate plane, parachuted in, and we can't find them. 6 Nazi commandos are on the loose in Tehran, while the big 3 leaders are also in the city. And so Mike, over the next 4 days, as the conference goes on, engages in a cat and mouse game with these 6 men who are dedicated to finding the Allied leaders and killing them. As Mike says, when Nazi commandos shoot, they don't miss. And he's living with that constant terror. And as the book goes on, you can see there's Mike and his men going around the city. Tehran's a city of 1 million people, knocking on doors. They go to the bazaars, the twisting marketplace, looking for these men. And the men are always one step away, and they give a $20,000 reward. And all the action is sort of coming to a head. These 6 men trying to kill these 3 leaders, and it's all leading to one night, the night of November 30th, Churchill's 69th birthday. And there's a photograph, the front piece of my book, of the 3 Allied leaders in the British embassy on that night at Churchill's birthday. FDR, Churchill, Stalin sitting shoulder to shoulder, a birthday cake in front of them. They're singing happy birthday. And at that very moment, the 6 commandos are trying to make their way to these water tunnels that connect to the British embassy so they can get into the grounds, burst through the doors, and get into the dining room and change history. How does it end? How does it all play out? Well, you'll read the book, you'll see, but I don't think I'm giving too much away. I hope I'm not giving too much away to you if I tell you that they're not killed. FDR, Churchill, and Stalin survived their time in Tehran, and the Allies go on to win the war. So let's go to after the Tehran conference, December 17th, 1943, 2 weeks later after the three leaders leave Tehran, and we're in the Oval Office, and FDR has called the press in to discuss the conference. And they're talking for about a half hour, and finally he says, you know, there was one security issue. I had to move from the American legation to stay at the Russian embassy because there were security concerns. There were Nazi assassins loose on the city. And then he sort of laughs to himself and he says, and this is a direct quote, it would have been a pretty good haul if they got all three of us. And the reporters join in laughing too. And then, most amazingly, FDR starts talking about China, and the reporters don't ask any follow-up questions. And that's it. What happened in Tehran remains buried. It's one of the secrets of the war. Rumors spread, but like the Kennedy assassination, it seems to be beyond our grasp of what actually happened. And then in 2003, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, has a press conference where they release a treasure trove of classified documents about what happened in Iran at the conference. And they present one of their agents, who is now an old man, who was just a teenager at the time, to tell about the role the Russians played in capturing the Nazi commandos. And when I had these documents translated, I used them as my starting point. I then went on a trail through past memoirs by Mike Reilly, FDR's bodyguard, and then participants in the Operation Long Jump who gave interviews after the war. And then I went to the document centers in Germany, in the United States, in England, and I was able to find pieces, corroborations. The aerial insertion missions, for example, were all there in the German archives. And I put all the pieces together, and those were the building blocks for my story. And that's how I came to write, really, Night of the Assassins. I tried to, it's an entirely true story, but I was able to put the pieces together from these factual archival accounts. And that brings me back to what I was saying at the beginning. These days, more than ever in America, I think we can understand how precarious life can be, how much we turn to our leaders, how life can change just like that. And I think we can understand with a sense of immediacy and a chilling sense of terror what hung in the balance if the assassins that Germany had sent into Tehran had succeeded on the night of the assassins. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. So we are going to have some questions here rolling in. Let's start with this one. Can you speak a little bit about the historical question of these events? And at one point, there was some debate as to how much of this happened or to what extent it happened. Do you consider that issue settled at this point?
I consider it settled. There are other people who don't. I have a note on sources that runs at the back of the book that explains it in great detail. I also have an essay in Time magazine that's out now that also talks about the sourcing of the book. Basically, the Russian documents are the key to making the case. There are some historians who say that this Russian disinformation. One noted historian says it's a Stalinist plot, and he raises the question, why would Putin want to raise old Stalinist issues? Well, the logical answer to me, after going to the archives, is that they were true. I've had this problem before in other books. I did my last book, In the Enemy's House, was about the Rosenberg case. There were many people who said the Rosenbergs were framed, they're framed, but you can look at the actual cables and you can see that Julius Rosenberg ran a spy ring, the NKVD cables that we deciphered. At the same time, in any espionage story, the search for truth is the search for greater hypotheses. I mean, getting to the bottom is very difficult. For a previous book, went to CIA headquarters, and I was talking with one of the officials, a man quite high up in the hierarchy, and I told him, my goal is to write a true story. And he starts laughing. He says, in espionage, there are no true stories because something is always buried, something is always hidden, and everyone has an agenda. I've tried to take that all into account. I've used my critical eye, put all the pieces together. And until the last files are opened up, I think the account I tell will last as the definitive story of the Night of the Assassins.
All right. Somebody asked here, were there any collaboration from the German side?
By collaboration with the Americans. Mm-hmm. The German side was actually, they had a Russian double agent who was working in Section 6 of the SS, and he was on the Iranian desk, and he was able to give a great deal of information. And then there was a German asset, a woman, Lily Sanjari, and she was having an affair with the Nazi field agent in Tehran. And at the same time, she was having an affair with an American soldier who played a trumpet in a jazz band. And it turned out that this trumpet playing American soldier in Tehran was a military intelligence agent. So she was unwittingly a key source of the information of what the Germans were up to. Anything else?
I am looking through here now. A lot of congratulations and thank yous to scroll through.
For me, I hope.
Yes, I believe so.
Oh, good.
All right, it looks like that is it. So thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time to visit with us tonight. And we hope your first Zoom presentation wasn't too painful.
No, I just hope I can get to Kansas City soon and have some barbecue. So thank you.
All right, we will have you back anytime, Howard. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Okay, bye-bye.